This week on For the Record, allegations of fraud in Minnesota have led the federal government to halt some funding for childcare. What does it mean for Wisconsin?
So you're pretty confident that the guardrails put in place basically 15 years ago are sufficient for the scrutiny that our state might come out under today?
Yes.
Plus, more communities across the state are speaking out against proposed AI data centers, how a new bill could strengthen protections for Wisconsinites. And later, we're sitting down with Joel Brennan, the latest candidate in the large Democratic primary field for governor.
How would a Brennan administration, or would it look different than an Evers administration?
Well, I think there's one big difference.
That's all coming up on For the Record.
Tough questions, real answers. Wisconsin's political conversations start here. This is For the Record.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Ellie LaLiberte. Well, this week, Minnesota is in turmoil after an immigration enforcement agent shot and killed a U.S. citizen in Minneapolis. The shooting has led to protests around the country, including here in Madison. As of Friday, Minnesota law enforcement was unable to investigate the deadly shooting. That's because the FBI took control of the case. The woman killed was Renee Nicole Good. She was a 37-year-old U.S. citizen who leaves behind a wife and children. The White House maintains its claim that Good was participating in a, quote, act of domestic terrorism, but as of Friday have not provided any evidence.
This is absolutely a tragedy, but it's a tragedy of the making of the far left. They have radicalized a very small segment of the population, taught them that ICE agents are engaging in wide-scale violation of people's rights.
The agent who opened fire was a member of ICE's Special Response Team, a specially trained tactical unit within the agency's enforcement and removal operations. Experts are now weighing in on the use of force.
She's trying to get around that vehicle, is what it appears to me. She has the steering wheel turned to the right, and she's trying to get away. I hate to say it, but you have to tune out the noise. You have to focus on your objective.
The Department of Homeland Security's policy says guns can't be fired to stop a moving car unless the car is being used in a way that poses an imminent threat of death or a serious bodily injury. The Trump administration sent 2,000 federal agents to Minneapolis amid accusations of fraud in Minnesota. In response, the administration is freezing $10 billion in funds for social services and child care in 5 Democratic-led states. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services also announced states are now required to make additional checks in order to receive funding. Now, Wisconsin's funding is currently not impacted, but I sat down with the Wisconsin Early Childhood Association about what safeguards are in place in our state.
Everybody who owns and operates a child care center is kind of hanging on by their fingertips.
Heather Murray runs the Art House preschool in Waunakee. She knows firsthand the funding challenges that come with the job, especially as other states are at risk of losing federal support with renewed concerns about fraud.
And when you have a budget that is very razor thin, any type of money that doesn't come in is going to have real effects.
But Ruth Schmidt, the executive director of the Wisconsin Early Childhood Association, isn't worried about fraud. She says after Wisconsin's own child care fraud scandal roughly 15 years ago, the state overhauled licensing and reporting requirements.
So there's an Office of Program Integrity whose sole responsibility is to ensure that Wisconsin is an excellent steward of our public dollars. Additionally, at that time, we put in place significant changes within licensing and reporting requirements with child care programs.
So you're pretty confident that the guardrails put in place basically 15 years ago are sufficient for the scrutiny that our state might come out under today?
Yes.
And I want to talk too, because we've seen the federal government halt funding for a couple of states now. And I want to just kind of get your reaction to that as we're seeing it kind of unfold. There's a lot of uncertainty still, but as we're seeing that start to unfold.
Wisconsin is not one of those 5 states. Wisconsin does not have a freeze on our funding right now. What has happened with these 5 states and the threat to freeze $10 billion worth of funding, that includes the Child Care Development Fund dollars. It includes temporary assistance to needy families. It includes the child care, or it includes the community service block grant dollars that go to states, all money that goes into supporting primarily low-income working families. I certainly don't anticipate something like that in Wisconsin, and I struggle personally and professionally on how we would possibly pit families and communities and children most at need in sort of a political kind of game that's being played.
She is worried the rhetoric could vilify the industry.
And it's already an industry that is so fragile.
According to a 2024 survey by the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families, the childcare industry is unable to serve roughly 33,000 kids due to a lack of staff.
We need 4,000 more childcare teachers just to meet the need of what exists already in our state. You start attacking this field, you start criticizing the ethics of what is happening with these childcare programs, and you think for a minute we're going to be able to continue to recruit people to do this amazing work in our state?
Those impacts felt by providers like Murray.
There shouldn't be any fear of fraud here, I wouldn't think. But again, we are an industry that are holding on.
And according to Schmidt, in Wisconsin, a significant amount of federal dollars go into the Child Care and Development Fund, a block grant program. Now, in a statement, the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families told me, quote, "At this time, we do not believe Wisconsin programs are impacted by this freeze. However, the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families continues to monitor the situation closely, and we will review any guidance from the federal government for potential impacts and share information as it becomes available." This week, Congressman Derek Van Orden was one of several Republicans who'd joined Democrats on a vote to advance legislation extending Affordable Care Act premium subsidies. Van Orden has long opposed the Affordable Care Act, but in a press release, he cited rising premiums and narrowing choices as reasons behind his vote. Hannah Dugan submitted her resignation from the bench to Governor Tony Evers. In December, a jury found Dugan guilty of obstruction for helping an immigrant evade federal agents in her courthouse. Since then, Republicans in the legislature have called on Dugan to resign or face impeachment. In her letter, Dugan refers to herself as the subject of unprecedented federal legal proceedings and that those proceedings are far from concluded. She and her lawyers are currently preparing an appeal to her felony conviction. The man charged with stalking the Wisconsin Supreme Court Chief Justice will avoid jail time. 37-year-old Ryan Thornton pleaded guilty to 2 misdemeanors, intimidating a victim and disorderly conduct. In exchange, the prosecutor dismissed the initial felony charge of stalking. Prosecutors charged Thornton in October of last year, alleging he sent repeated threatening emails to Chief Jill Karofsky. A criminal complaint alleged the emails included insulting language and asked for the Chief Justice's home address. Thornton will serve 4 years of probation and is barred from contacting Justice Karofsky. The Chief Justice has released a statement in response. It reads in part, quote, "We are at a pivotal moment in our history facing a massive increase in attacks on judges and the rule of law. A court cannot carry out its constitutional role if the people inside the courthouse do not feel secure." An attorney for the former Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice who investigated the 2020 election results is arguing the disciplinary proceedings against that former justice are violating his right to due process. Michael Gableman's lawyers made those claims in response to 2 current members of the state Supreme Court, Justices Janice Protasiewicz and Rebecca Frank-Dallett, refusing to recuse themselves from the proceedings. The letter to the Supreme Court from Gableman's attorney reads in part, quote, "This court should seriously consider whether it can provide due process." Notably, Justice Susan Crawford did recuse herself from this case. And this past week, members of the state assembly held a hearing for legislation that would change Wisconsin's drunk driving laws. Under the bill, a person who has had their operating privileges revoked under an ignition interlock device order would have that revocation extended for 180 days every time the device detects one of the following. That includes 3 or more violations within a 60-day period, tampering with or attempting to circumvent the device, or removing the device authorization. Speaking in support of the bill was a Wisconsin family who lost their daughter to a drunk driver.
It didn't have to happen. It's preventable. And anything you can do to help support. Wonderful.
Coming and testifying today, I can only imagine.
The bill would also eliminate the waiting period for people with OWIs, changing it to whenever they have the IID installed in their car. The bill has bipartisan support. This week in Janesville, residents handed a petition to City Hall, hoping to have more of a say in potential data center developments. The No Janesville Data Center Coalition petition garnered 4,500 signatures. They're asking that any development project at the publicly owned former General Motors plant site go to voters for referendum. It's the most recent pushback from residents after protesters outside City Hall gathered in the fall. Now, while that was going on in Janesville, the DeForest Village Board this week denied a petition for a referendum around a potential data center in the village. It would require development of any annexed areas larger than 30 acres or costing more than $10 million to go to referendum. The company Quality Technology Service, or QTS, wants DeForest to annex about 1,700 acres in the town of Vienna for it to build its data center.
Somebody offers DeForest $50 million. DeForest is going to jump all over that. They don't see this money just offered to them, but at the same time, they have to remember who they're doing business with.
And at the state capitol, Republican lawmakers introduced a bill to strengthen protections for Wisconsinites from utility bill and environmental concerns with data centers. Representative Shannon Zimmerman of River Falls and Senator Romaine Quinn of Birchwood just released their bill for sponsorship on Tuesday, saying the data centers require a lot of energy consumption and need to be responsible. The proposed bill would require the Public Service Commission to ensure no other customers will see the cost of construction or extensions of data center on their utility bills. It also includes a requirement that water used by a data center for cooling must be in a contained closed-loop system to recycle it, which QTS claims its DeForest data center would have. Next on For the Record, we're sitting down with the latest candidate in the race for governor, how the former Evers official says his administration would be different. Welcome back to For the Record. Well, this week we're sitting down with the latest candidate in the race for governor. Joel Brennan, the former secretary of the Wisconsin Department of Administration, announced his campaign 1 month ago, saying affordability is going to be a top priority.
People are having trouble even figuring out how they're going to put food on the table. And you add to that the chaos that we have with Donald Trump in the White House. And it's reason enough for everybody to be angry. And I'm angry. But, you know, some people, when they get angry, they want to get even. Me, when I get angry, I want to roll up my sleeves and get something done. And so, you know, we're at a point now after the first of the year where a couple 100,000 people have lost health care here potentially. And others have seen their premiums doubled, tripled. There's just real issues, real affordability issues that people are sitting around their kitchen table worried about.
And I want to touch on this topic of affordability too, because it is likely the issue in this race. So how are you planning to make Wisconsin affordable for residents here?
Well, there's a whole host of issues on which affordability, you know, is raised for various people around the state. One, you know, most immediately is around health care. Wisconsin's one of only about 8 states that never expanded Medicaid, going back to 2014. You know, one of the first things we can do is to make sure that we're expanding Medicaid.
Now, Brennan served as the top official under Governor Tony Evers during the pandemic, something he touted in his campaign launch video. How would a Brennan administration, or would it look different than an Evers administration?
Well, I think there's one big difference. First of all, it was a thrill for me to be able to be the top appointed official in the governor's cabinet for 3 years as the secretary of the Department of Administration. But one of the challenges he's faced has been for almost 7 years of that, there was this huge Republican majority in the Assembly and in the state Senate, working with the new state Supreme Court and working, in the Evers administration. One of the ways I think it's going to be very different, that I can be a different kind of governor than Tony Evers has been, is I'll be able to be on the offensive a little bit more. There are things that he's been unable to do and been thwarted in the legislature by that we can do. The number one thing is expanding Medicaid, and expanding Badger Care. That has been in every budget that the governor has produced, and we haven't been able to make progress on it. There are investments that he has tried to do and made some benefit on in early childhood education in the last budget, but he's been thwarted for the most part on that. And so there are ways that we can start to change those things that, because of the way the legislature has been over the last 7 years and going back even 15 years, that we are going to be able to make some progress on moving forward that we haven't been able to in the Evers administration.
Now, Brennan announced this week his campaign has raised more than $500,000 in 3 weeks. Now, he wouldn't give an exact number for what he's hoping to reach, but he says he'll be competitive.
I'm really proud of what we were able to do in that short period of time. I'm humbled by the level of support that I've gotten from people around the state. I'm going to continue to do that. You know, the challenge that I have is that I'm not well known in certain parts of the state. And so I need to make sure that I am going there. It's not all going to be about campaign ads and financial work. It's going to be about being on the ground and being able to network and build on the relationships that I've established around the state.
And like nearly every other Democrat in the race, Brennan touched on what he called the, quote, chaos of the Trump administration. I asked if this race will end up being a referendum on the administration.
Well, I think there is nothing in society today in America that isn't somehow affected by what's going on in the Trump administration. And the operative word when it comes to the Trump administration is chaos. Whoever we have as our governor needs to be able to stand up to the Trump administration and to ensure that what we're doing in Wisconsin isn't harmed irreparably what's going on there. But ultimately, this race can't just be about Donald Trump. It has to be about a future forward vision. That's what I'm going to try to do.
Now, that was a condensed version of our conversation with Brennan. For the full interview, you can head to channel3000.com. And as we mentioned, Brennan is jumping into an already crowded primary. On your screen now are the candidates in the race on the Democratic side. The primary election is on August 11th, with the general taking place on November 3rd. And here are the Republicans running. We have the bios for each of these candidates up right now on our website. And next on For the Record, we're sitting down with the editor of the Capital Times after the state superintendent called a bombshell article misleading.
You're watching For the Record with host Ellie LaLiberte.
In 2025, the State Department of Public Instruction found itself in hot water after an investigation from the Capital Times said grooming cases were, quote, shielded from the public. I sat down with the superintendent, Jill Underly, in a year-end interview as she continued to call for a correction of that article. But this week, I sat down with Cap Times editor Mark Trinan to get a response to some of those claims the superintendent made.
That headline was completely false. Our job is to investigate, any allegations of misconduct and, with teachers. That's our job. And I'm proud of the work that we do at the DPI. I mean, we're very thorough. We, use the information that we are given.
So you heard her say there that that headline is completely false. What's your reaction to that?
Well, obviously, we don't agree, and we stand by our reporting, both the headlines and the entire report. Notably, the superintendent, while she has called for a correction, hasn't identified any inaccurate information in the story. So we've found that the reporting was accurate. It was carefully and thoroughly fact-checked before publication. And we also gave Dr. Underly multiple opportunities to talk with us before we published the story, and her staff was aware of what our findings were showing, because we had asked them multiple questions regarding our findings. So I stand by the headline. I think it was fair and accurate, and if you look at what the DPI has done since our published report, you can see that one of the activities they've undertaken supports the headline. The headline said that there were 200 some cases shielded from the public of teacher misconduct, and what the DPI has done since we published that story has been to unshield information. So to me, that supports the premise.
And I want to get into that a little bit more. We have another soundbite I want to play for you here in a second, because in this fallout, as you mentioned, DPI created that database to help people identify revoked licenses. Let's take a listen to Underly explaining that database.
I mean, we have always been transparent. So all the information that we've put in this database, it's really just a website that takes information that was already publicly available and reorganized it so that it's a little bit easier, I suppose, for people to find the information. We had also put in effect before the article, we had already been promulgating rules to look at teacher conduct.
So she's saying there that all that information was available, but as I understand it, your reporter had a hard time finding all of that. It was a year-long investigation. Kind of walk me through what the reporting and what those barriers were like.
That's right. So prior to some of the information now being added to their website, you access that information by making a public records request to the Department of Public Instruction. In our case, we identified over 450 cases of some form of teacher misconduct that had been investigated over about a 5-year period by the DPI. We asked, in one instance, a request, we asked for just 10 case files of cases we knew about that where teachers had been accused of some form of sexual misconduct or grooming behavior toward students. We asked for that in April. We didn't receive those records until September. So it took about 5 months to get these records for 10 cases. That represents fewer than 10% of all the cases of that nature that the DPI investigates in a 1-year period. So just to get 10% of 1 year's worth of cases took us like 5 months. I would argue that that is not readily transparent and available to the public.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you.
For the Record, we'll be right back. Well, as a political reporter, I've always wanted to talk to George Washington. And this is my lucky week as the musical Hamilton is back in Madison for the 3rd time at the Overture Center. The winner of 11 Tony Awards and a Pulitzer Prize, Hamilton is the story of founding father Alexander Hamilton. Actor A.D. Weaver plays George Washington. He calls this show the dream of a lifetime.
It's one of those shows where you kind of, if you mess up, there really isn't room to mess up, but you kind of have to keep going. It's so fun. It's so moment to moment and back to forth and exchanging the energy with the cast members. The lyrics are so witty. You can't wait to deliver the next punchline.
Hamilton runs through the 18th. Tickets are still available at overture.org. And that does it for us this week. And a reminder, you can watch full episodes of the show as well as expanded interviews on our website, channel3000.com. Have a great rest of your weekend. For the Record, I'm Ellie LaLiberte.
This has been For the Record.